Welcome to Idea Store Audio. You are listening to a talk by Kelly Foster of the Black Cultural Archives entitled The Michael Banton Papers. This talk was given at Tower Hamlets Local History Library and Archives on October the 13th, 2010 as part of Black History Month.
Just to say a little bit about the collection at the Black Cultural Archives, which was started by volunteers. Black Cultural Archives was founded in 1981, and one of the key motivators for its foundation and the African People's Historical Monument Foundation, which is the the official title of the organisation, was this motivator for people from the black community, people of African descent, to start really collecting and valuing their own history, to put together this archive collection and to really gather the evidence of their experience and gather the evidence of their role in British history. So our archive collection spans around about or over 10,000 documents, where it's been interesting over the past few years. There are a number of people in the room who've been involved in that process of cataloguing the collection, and things are still coming to us. Attics are still being emptied, garages are still being ransacked, and people are still looking under their beds for these really important documents. I'm going to jump back to the 20th century. Caroline had us in the 19th. I'm going to jump back. That's just some examples of the sort of stuff that's in the collection. It's from the vernacular we've got there on the right-hand side at a funeral programme from 2002 through to some of those Edwardian-type photographs that we saw Caroline presenting on. So this is a collection or part of it, the collection that I'm going to speak about as I had it spread out a couple of days ago when I was looking at it. And going back to this idea about serendipity, and one of the issues might be, why are the Banton Papers, as we call them, with us? Now, Michael Banton is a sociologist. He was the author of The Colour Quarter, which was published in 1955, Negro Immigrants in an English City, which is about this area, the Colour Quarter, as Stepney was sometimes known. And the Colour Quarter was, the original draft of it was his PhD dissertation, which we can see is that bound volume in the back, Negro Immigrants in the Docklands area, which he completed in 1954. And the Banton Papers are his research papers. He then went on to publish all these books. So he was writing quite a lot on which you can all read sideways, writing a lot on race and race relations and discrimination in the 1960s and throughout the 70s. And the one at the top there, which is Negroes in Britain by Kenneth Little, which was published in 1958, is where he cut his teeth. He worked as a researcher with Kenneth Little, and I think that book's mostly based on Butte Town in Cardiff. And he then moved on to to research his PhD, which originated as a study of stowaways, of Negro stowaways in the Docklands area. And here we've got a nice section map, which I seem to have scrawled all over with a highlighter pen, just to show and sort of situate you. So this is a map of the Aldgate area. So originally his research was about Negro stowaways who settled in the Docklands area, in the Stepney area, and his research kind of shifted to be more generally about the so-called community and the so-called Colour Quarter in the Stepney area. But it does quite interestingly include a lot or quite a few letters written by stowaways in their defence to the magistrate and to the court, as well as some letters written by stowaways back home, encouraging people to come and telling a little bit about the life to expect here. But again, as both Caroline and Hakeem said, these papers come to us with a certain voice and with a certain point of view. And rather than being the institutional point of view, it's the point of view of a researcher that was conducting this research as a 24-year-old white English man in the Stepney area in the 1950s. So this little map, and he's got a number of very sort of detailed pencil-drawn maps of the different families that lived in the different houses, and I think he has it for sort of all the Whitechapel and Stepney area. If I can find it, and I've probably left the boundaries of the Coloured Quarter, if I can remember it, was Lenmar Street. Google Map, that's it. Was Lenmar Street, and Commercial Road to the east, the Docklands to the south, Whitechapel Road to the north, and I can't remember what it was to the east, but that is really what was known as the coloured quarter. If I can just read a bit from his thesis and what he says about it. The coloured quarter in Stepney serves a double function for the Negro immigrants. In the first place, it is a transition area where immigrants first settle and from which more ambitious and able newcomers soon depart for districts of higher social standing. Many of the immigrants living in better residential neighbourhoods come back to Stepney in the evenings and at the weekends to meet their friends. So the coloured quarter serves the second function of being a social centre for far more Negroes than those who actually live there. Especially at weekends, coloured men come there from other parts of London for African-style food, for girls, and for relaxation in the neighbourhoods where their different appearance doesn't make them objects of particular attention. There is a definite feeling amongst them that Stepney is the coloured man's district. They have occupied it and made it their own, and they behave there with much greater freedom than they do elsewhere. So this was written in 1954. What also pops up in these papers is this little report here, report on investigation into the conditions of the coloured population in the Stepney area, which was an independently published report, I think by the East End Advisory Committee, which was a committee of people whose object was to persuade the Colonial Office to provide another hostel. And if I skip back, right, so that little square here, which is on Lenman Street, is the Colonial House, which was a club and a hostel which was established by the Colonial Office, and it was a coloured-only hostel. And this was at a time when, I think it was estimated in 1944 that there were around 400 coloured men in the Cable Street area. 400 is a very unreliable estimation. The estimation was put together by the authors of that report based on people's names. And as Caroline said, where someone is called John Smith, that's not all that reliable. But it was also based on some going out and doing interviews and a general estimation on the population of men. And it was estimated that from that 400, about 75 of them were living with their families. So the majority of them were single, and housing was an issue. So there were a number of hostels and clubs. You can see them marked on the map. There's a couple there either side of Whitechapel. The map, not very helpfully, doesn't come with road names. So you can see them either side of Whitechapel Road there. What is quite interesting about this report is the foundation of it was a report written by a guy called David Bamatu, which again, I'm assuming is African. But it gives us a slightly different insight to this investigation, this report written by an African man in 1949, than the report written by a white PhD researcher in 1942. So we've got on there, if you can see it, these are photographs taken from his thesis. So they're a bit difficult to scan in, so I took a picture of a picture. And that's Cable Street. And it says, the darkness and lifelessness of the bridges and the tall warehouses make the district seem frightening to the stranger who goes there on a winter evening. But, it was, I think, in a certain context, it was very much the whole Cable Street, this coloured quarter was a kind of no-go area to a certain extent. Some people found it very intimidating. So back to the Colonial House, which was on Lenman. Now, the Colonial House, as I said, was established by... Oh, that's the wrong one. But anyway, the Colonial House was established by the Colonial Office. It was a coloured-only club and hostel for coloured seamen. And it was seen as... it was run by the Colonial Office. It was set up by Lord Listowel. And then it was closed by the Colonial Office in 1948, and it was then the management of it was then taken over by a coloured man who was thought to be Jamaican. But it was really originally established because Lord Listowel obviously said it was obviously desirable that colonial people who settle here should be dealt with as part and parcel of the community as a whole, and not a segregated minority under the protection of the government department. Such treatment is out of harmony with our conception of the relationship that should exist between the peoples of the colonies and its mother country. So after that, they closed the Colonial House. And housing became even more of an issue for a lot of the single seamen. Now, this is a pamphlet which is part of Michael Banton's papers of the colonial workers. I don't know if you can all read what it says up there. So this was published by the Stepney Communist Party. And this particular issue deals with the Colonial House. And as you can see, the Stepney the colonial worker and the Stepney Communist Party say, we address... I can't read it off that. Let's see if I've got it here. Yeah. So we address these pages to the citizens of Stepney whose native lands are tied down and exploited by foreign capital, and through them we extend our greetings to their fellow countrymen in Africa and the Caribbean, in Malta, Malaya and Cyprus. We are now increasing in number, taking up the struggle against the savage rule of imperialism. These pages are also for whoever may care to read them in order to learn the truth about life under colonial rule. So the first issue that this document talks about is the Colonial House. And it says, I am looking at Colonial House. It stands an insult to those who are expected to use it, just at the top of Lemon Street in Stepney, with its dark and cheerless rooms, its cellar of a dining hall, its cramped sleeping space. It is a dump. I tell a few people what a dump that building is and how it should be knocked down and a really fine building put up for our coloured visitors. Also, I say that besides building hostels, British people should invite these coloured men into their homes. There's quite a nice home. But housing was a particular problem, especially for the single men, and it was remarked that a number of the men were living in, and this is after the Second World War, a number of the men were living in bombed-out houses. So this is another example of a group that was set up this time in the Cable Street area. You can see its registered office there. Now, I've added this in because this is a nice little adjunct, a nice little organisation. In this case, it talks about the Crew Student Society, but there was also the Crew Friendly Society and also the United Crew Association, I think it was called. And they were established in 1905, and Crew is a small, well, it still is, it's now a small suburb outside of Freetown in Sierra Leone. And it was a small fishing village in the early 1900s outside of Freetown. And it kind of blew my mind when I came across this, to think that this small little fishing village would have established a charity to support its children who may have come over to the UK to study or come over to work. And this particular organisation had offices in Liverpool, as well as in London and Cardiff. So, as a result of that lovely report, a report on the investigation into the condition of coloured people in Stepney and what it calls an urgent problem, the Stepney Coloured People's Association was established. And that came as a result of the East London Advisory Committee. And as you can see there, one of the main, or the second aim, was to exist for the promotion of goodwill between all peoples and to defend the rights of the coloured peoples of Stepney. Now, it was identified in that report that there were 4 problems that, made up this urgent problem for Tower Hamlets and for Stepney as a whole. One was the accommodation of the families. So accommodation was very hard to come by because of the coloured bar, the lack of housing for single men, the lack of recreational facilities, and interestingly the report talks about unsuitable recreational facilities like gambling dens and back alley pubs and cafes, which all sound quite nice to me. But then there's also the issues of prostitution and brothel in the dock area, and then high unemployment as well among these coloured seamen. Really, I'm going to leave it there. If I flick back to this first one and say these papers are ripe for researchers to come and use. And these are just a couple of boxes out of the thousands that we have at the Black Cultural Archives that we're hoping people will use more. We are close to the public at the minute because we're in the midst of recruiting a number of members of staff. But we will be open back for researchers to come and use the reading room facility from November. I'm going to close this bit in talking about Michael Banton's papers just because this sort of fits in with, I know here at Tower Hamlets Archive, the current project is about social housing. So his PhD ends with this, the new rises amongst the old, this housing estate which is rising out of the slums and the bomb-damaged houses in and amongst Stepney, and which will then come to house a new generation of Stepney residents as well. Now on to the bit about the new Black Heritage Centre. So this is what we've been doing down in South London and what we're about to start doing down in South London. And that is to build a permanent home, so we'll be able to open to researchers at least 5 days a week to build a purpose-built archive repository for the archive collections. And this is the shell, the potential that we'll be working with, which is Raleigh Hall and Windrush Square. So that £5 million that you've been reading about, most of it is going to go into developing that and turning it into that. Ooh. Bright lights and everything. we'll have in there 2 gallery spaces, one devoted to changing exhibitions, an education room, as well as sort of breakout spaces and seminar rooms as well. And then on the top floor is where the reading room and library will be situated. And if you look on the that nice brick extension there on the right-hand side is where the changing exhibition space will be, and then on the top of that will house the archive. So I hope I've just given you a brief insight into a part of the collection at the BCA that relates to Stepney, and as I said, is ripe for researchers to come and use. Please do come down. I'm going to close it there. That's my contact details, should anyone want to call me, which would be very nice. But I just quickly want to close by saying, as both Hakeem and as Caroline have said, it's now the responsibility of the Black Cultural Archives and the responsibility of everyone in this room and people who are custodians of this history to make sure that it's looked after, to make sure that it's there for future generations and for other people to use. And if you want to know how to do that or where you can do that, please do give me a call. I'm only at the end of the phone.